Hi everybody, this is Green Dreams Come True and Green Dreams Productions. Today I'm going to teach you how to make the perfect worm bin. I'm going to teach you about vermiculture, growing worms, and also vermicomposting, farming worm compost. Alright, this is my latest prototype, number 7. This is a hygrometer. It allows me to measure the temperature and the humidity. As you can see, I use stainless steel staples that will not erode from the moisture, and a window grate. My daughter was kind enough to allow me to use her room for filming today, so thank you. Here are some of the materials that I used. What I just showed you here is the inside of the worm bin. It is 2-layered. I'll show you the outer shell layer in a moment. Alright, what I have here is a part of the lid that I cut out. The lid also has mesh. It's a little different. I'll go over that in a moment. Now, just in case you would like to know, here are the sizes of totes that I used for this particular construction. And it was very nice to keep the plastic because I was able to use it when I stapled through here, which is very difficult since this is a very thick BPA-free plastic. Alright, here are some of the other tools I used to hammer. I used actually 3 kinds of tapes. That is only in the lid. Only. That's important. Do not put adhesives or glues of any kind at the bottom of your tote. You do not want that eroding into your mixture, into your light shade, or going into the worms or the vermicompost. I used a stapler. They're not very expensive, $10 to $30 depending on the size. Here are the staples that I use. I will link specific materials below. This is a plug, a rubber plug for the spout that's going to go right here. This is the shell. As you can see, it has wheels. So I can nicely move it. It's so great. I put the handles from the other tote inside, and you can get it out a little bit. So the purpose of doing this is to elevate it, allowing continuous airflow. That is also the purpose of the holes. Now, the more airflow, the more aerobic this environment will be. Worms and a majority of the beneficial microbes, such as bacteria and fungi, they breathe oxygen. Okay? If there's not enough oxygen, then different kinds of microbes will grow. The kinds that are typically not beneficial in agriculture because they hurt plants instead of helping plants. We want fully composted material, and that is the goal of constructing this specific environment. And this particular tote comes with a handle, which is so nice for moving this thing around. Alright. Also used 2 different pairs of scissors, a cutting knife, box cutter, whatever you want to call it. And then I like to label things. That helps. One of the options for our lids has this wonderful seal. I wish that more lids came this way. I'm still going to have to put a hole in it. It does not have a hole yet. This lid is good to go. It's going to go on the outer shell for now. If I choose to modify it later, I can do that. For now, I'm going to use this. Here are some of the tools of the trade that we use in vermiculture and vermicomposting. I love isopropyl alcohol, 70%. You can spray it on everything, your fingers included, and it will just evaporate into hydrogen, and it will sanitize your hands very, very effectively and non-toxically. Also, googly eyes just make everything funnier. This is a pH meter. If you are worried that it is too acidic or too alkaline for your worms, or when you're balancing what comes out to apply it to plants, for example, then a pH meter is very handy. You do need to calibrate electronic pH meters. This is a handheld microscope, very handy if you are wanting to know if there are specific microorganisms or micro insects, for example, that you are worried about potentially harming a crop, in case you need to adjust what is composting in your bin. These are some pH tests I use in the field regularly. Here's some crab shell that I partially pulverized, and I want to point that out because, as you can see, it has a variety of different sizes of particles inside. These small ones are going to dissolve and be metabolized very quickly by different organisms. These big pieces are going to take forever. There are different reasons for that. The main reason that I really like to use shells, egg shells, crab shells, lobster shells, any shells are great as long as they're cooked. You do want to sanitize them because it's not the same as the plant material that you're decomposing. You want to make sure that the microbes are dead if there are any. So the main reason for using these particles is because we need grit in what is essentially the gizzard of the worm. They need sand or something hard to swallow to help break up their food for them. And then measuring utensils, which come in very handy, and my trusty stirring spoon, which is also great to use instead of your hand. All right, what we're gonna do is start off by assembling our complete worm bin. And I want it to go down so that I can put my other lid on it. I'm also testing the pressure points. It's fantastic. Now I'm going to start to layer it with different ingredients. I love to start with leaves. These came from my yard, and as you can see, I don't care if it's pretty. They've actually sat in this bin for a moment, which has allowed them to break down a little bit. I'm going to spread it out. Once again, doesn't need to be pretty. Big sticks, we throw those out. If you leave some for later, that's okay. You can throw them out later. They just don't break down very fast. Alright, here's my initial leaf layer. Next up, I'm going to show you this. So, what we have here is shredded paper materials. This is cardboard. I really like the cardboard with the rivets. The twin wall riveted cardboard is fantastic because the worms love to lay their eggs in them. They love to hide in them. They just feel safe. And we've got newspaper. Got some shredded grocery bags, a bit thicker than normal paper, and then I've got some paper towels. The reason we're using a diversity of different materials is because if the worms for some reason do not like the substrate that they are in, they can move to a new area. Also, this will allow a slow and continuous breakdown of material at different rates. And should I choose to later, I can just add more of things like the paper towel that break down super quick, should I choose to. The cardboard will take longer, but that's good. Because if everything breaks down, then there's nowhere for them to feel safe to lay eggs. You want them to feel safe so they lay lots of eggs. So we're dumping all of this material right in. Alright, here are our egg cartons. I checked. There are no dangerous materials in these. I'm just going to roughly rip them, throw them into the corners. We'll deal with those in a minute. They don't need to be pretty. Alright. We showed you the tools. Let's get on to some of our other ingredients now. So what I have here is a mixture of things. And in this, along with many other bins, I like to run some experiments. So I like to add a lot of biochar material. This is just some burnt wood, non-treated. You do not want to use treated wood. This is essentially biochar. There are different particle sizes. I'm doing that on purpose. It will all break down, even stuff like this, because eventually it's going to be consumed by fungi, mostly fungi, with some bacteria in that instance. These are some old root balls from last summer. I'm just going to break them up and throw them in to give some texture to the soil and make the environment nice for the worms. You need them to feel safe and that they have a home. Also, these little roots will eventually dissolve and be food for either the worms or microbes. These are some plug pods that are used for germinating different things, and it's mostly made out of coconut coir. We are also using coconut coir. The coconut coir was flushed several times. No matter where I get it from, I just do that no matter what. And that makes me feel better. This is a giant planting container of coconut coir. I want to see how long it will take for it to break down. Same with these, which I am going to break up a little bit in my hand as I put them in. This is some compost that I started breaking down. It's not fully composted. It's started to compost. And I acquired a whole bunch of this. It's from a couple of different pine varieties. And it's been breaking down in my truck for the last 3 months, hilariously. Now, since it's already been breaking down, it will definitely contain microorganisms which will contribute to the decomposition of our vermicompost. So it is not just vermicompost, it's also fungal and bacterial compost as well. Now, this will also provide texture to the soil, slowly break down. I'm curious how well. I've never added this before. Also, it's likely rather acidic. Now, people worry, oh, don't make it too acidic. Don't add oranges. Well, let me tell you, my worms eat lots of oranges. And if they don't like the orange, they can leave the orange and go somewhere that's not as acidic. That being said, microbes also break them down. The worms don't even really want to eat them typically until they become broken down. Worms are detrivores, and they eat dead things. They typically don't like things that are alive because they're harder to eat. We'll also be using some sand. I collected this from some of the desert regions here in Utah. Don't worry about those seeds. I won't throw them in from a tree. And the sand is going to provide grit. Sand is made out of silicon, so it also adds some quality to the mixture that you have in the end, but it does become a part of the vermicompost. Now, the reason you need to have sand, is because it doesn't break down very well, which is a perfect object to have in the stomach of a worm to break down the food for them. Right here, we also have some peat moss. This is a food source as well as a part of their home. Just adds a little texture. You really want a variety of environment inside of this bin for the worms. Now we're going to add some of this. Okay. Start off by roughly breaking my root balls. Anything I don't want in here, I can easily remove later through filtration. And I will show you that in a moment. Alright, here we go. A lot of those are really old, so they're just crumbling. Alright, this one I'm going to tear up roughly and just see how the worms handle it. I like to not have things that are too big in the worm bin because it has the potential to create an area that is anaerobic. We want to avoid that. We want as much aeration and airflow through this as possible. And in a moment, I'm going to mix all this up, so hold off on the angry comments. Okay. Now I'm adding peat moss. And yeah, I'm eyeing it. But you will learn to do that. And you'll learn to adjust it the more you do this. This is my 7th worm bin prototype of the year. I'm continuously trying to improve the design. This particular worm bin will be gnat proof. So my wife did not like having gnats in the house, and as I improved my prototype designs, I decided to make it better for her so I could have them inside, because they do so much better inside than they do outside in the cold. And here where I live, it gets really cold outside, so I like to have them inside. I am now adding my rinsed coconut coir. And this might look like a lot, but it's going to seriously shrink. Okay? I'm going to give it a little mix now. Nothing crazy. We're adding more. Making sure to get some of my leaves, but not my entire leaf layer. I want to leave just a little bit of my leaf layer at the bottom. Don't worry, I have more leaves. And I'm going to try to bury these coconut coirs and the egg cartons. Preferably not too close together. And then I'll check them later to see how they did or didn't break down. Okay, we're done with that. Just going to roughly throw in our charcoal or biochar. A little bit of decomposing wet newspaper just for fun. And cardboard. Okay. I am just going to add the pine needle compost to this side. I'll mix it in a little bit. That way I can observe how it's breaking down as opposed to the rest of the bin, which will eventually just be mixed together anyway. Oh, that smells nice. Okay. I'm adding in sand. You can use all sorts of different sand. In my opinion, having a variety of sand sizes is ideal. That's what you want to do. I don't feel like this is enough leaves, so now we're going to add some leaves so I feel better. Worms love breaking down leaves. They're already decomposing. And I can compact things a little when I'm starting this bin. Not like crazy. Oh, that's enough. Next, we're going to toss in some different kinds of food. If you have a banana, open it up. We got way too much fruit this week. Forgive me, it's unexpected. We typically don't throw away entire bananas. We've been juicing a lot. People will say, oh, worms don't like oranges. That's not true. My worms disintegrate oranges. And here's some other kitchen scraps from the last about a week. Now this stinks at the moment because it's anaerobic. Alright, as you can see, I had the lid on. And I did that on purpose, even though it's the opposite of what I said to do. And the reason is because if it breaks down anaerobically at first and then is put into the worm bin, it will then transform into an aerobic composition, or decomposition, excuse me. Alright, so I wanted to show you. There's all sorts of stuff in here. I actually just took, I don't know if you can see them, took these out. These are worm eggs, these little yellow balls. Took those and some worms out of another bin, tossed them in here for a minute before I transferred it. Don't worry, they're okay. I checked. This is going to be mixed in here as well. Alright, we're ready for our next phase. This is lychate. Lychate is the juice that comes out of the bottom of your bin. I juiced one of my other bins before I began so that I could use its leachate to inoculate this material with microorganisms and micronutrients, secondary metabolites, things that will essentially help it to break down at a faster rate. I'm going to be periodically adding it in very small amounts because I don't want it to go through the bottom. I want it to get into my material here. And the reason I'm adding all of this before I add any worms is because we want it to be a nice home before we put the worms in it. This is a recipe I've been working on for a while. Initially, I just added pulverized eggshells, and same as the crab shells, they are of different sizes. As you can see, there are some big chunks. There are also some very small microscopic chunks. I added equal parts of eggshells that were partially pulverized to acetic acid, which is vinegar. Now, the chemical reaction that occurs produces a form of calcium that is not only available to plants, but also available to the microorganisms. Now, our goal is to provide a store of slow-releasing nutrients to the microorganisms. The reason it's brown is because I added molasses. Molasses is a great sugar source for the microorganisms to just bloom really quick. I also added partially pulverized brown rice. That will add a slow energy source in the form of a carbohydrate or starch. You can just dump it in. It doesn't need to be pretty. Rinse it out with a little bit of my leachate. The reason I didn't mix it with water first is because I want it to distribute into the material, which will allow it to distribute and break down at a slower rate. You don't have to worry about the acidity of the vinegar because the alkalinity of the eggshells neutralizes it. You can also test your solution like I did if you're worried about it. Here is my coffee from this morning, which I regularly add to my worm food bin. Just going to toss that in there. Perfect. We're going to add a couple more things before we add some worms. So, we will use some oats. We will add a little bit of this mic. Mic is granulated ectomycorrhizal fungi, and if it survives in here, they are typically symbiotic with plants, and it will help anything that they grow with. So I like to inoculate with that product. It's a great product. No one is endorsing these videos, but if you would like to, feel free to reach out. Here is some of the molasses we use. I will be adding a little bit of rock phosphate. Never hurts to have any. I'll be adding a little bit of kelp and alfalfa meal. I'd prefer to also have alfalfa granules because then you'll have a slow releasing carbohydrate. All right. There we go. Perfect. I'm going to add some of these ingredients. Here's the rock phosphate. Please be careful with these powdered nutrients to not inhale them or get them into your eye. Rinse your hand when you're done handling them. Adding in some kelp meal. Just another easy food source for the microorganisms. Here's our alfalfa meal, and as you can see, I'm just using a handful or a spoonful of some of these products. Okay, I'm going to show you some of the chemistry. Since I've already added a lot, I'm just going to do enough to show you the reaction. You should be able to hear it as well. In approximately equal parts. You can neutralize the solution later with water. Alright, I'm going to explain what's happening. So, the eggshells are not soluble. They are fixated. They're not bioavailable. That means that most organisms, they can't use them. Eggshells are about 90% calcium carbonate, about 5% calcium phosphate, 1% magnesium carbonate, and 4% organic matter. Vinegar added to eggshells produces calcium acetate. Calcium acetate is soluble and bioavailable to many organisms. It also produces water and carbon dioxide, which dissipates into the atmosphere. I will include a nicer chart with the video, but here is the empirical formula, the stoichiometry for this reaction. Feel free to pause the video. Alright, as you can see, it stopped bubbling, which means that the reaction is mostly done. And now I'm just going to mix it into a bigger container. This is water that was dechlorinated by leaving it out. Dechlorinating your water is important, and you should try to look up online whether your water contains chlorine or chloramine. If your water contains chlorine, then you can just evaporate it out by leaving the water on the counter for 24 hours. If you have the attachment on your faucet that aerates the water as it comes out, typically any significant amount of chlorine will dissipate at that moment, and you don't need to worry. You can use the water right away. Alright, so as you can see, we have plenty of water. Water neutralizes the pH of solutions, so whether it's acidic or alkaline, it will become more neutral and less harmful to many organisms. Alright, we're going to add our last ingredients. This is some organic quick oats, another good source of nutrients for microorganisms. Alright, I'm going to give that a little swirl before I throw it in. Be careful with any amount of moisture. You don't want it just to run through. So I'm really trying to get some of these drier particles that it will stick to and absorb. And it has a ton of dry material below it. That's why I did not pre-soak the material. We still have lychate as well. All right. Next up is our already thriving worm bin. Look at this. Look at them pull away. There's so many in here. Just in this top couple of inches. They're just such happy worms. I feed them all sorts of stuff. And this does not smell like rotting food. This smells like the rainforest. It's amazing. This right here is my transfer vessel from one of my other bins, my finished bins. I pulled these guys out and I saved them from a dry, horrible death of dehydrating vermicompost. And I did it with citrus and melons. They like the mycelium, the mold that grows. This right here is amazing worm food. It also breaks down your material for you. Why just have the worms do it? Doesn't make sense. But as you can see, these guys are everywhere. All right, our video cut off there, so we're just going to pick up close to where we left off. I'm going to start adding a bunch of material into the bin, but I want to mix it around just a little bit first. Try to homogenize the mixture so it's somewhat similar throughout. And don't worry, we'll come in here and we'll mix it up even more later. This apple is pretty big. I don't like anything too big and too thick. Breaking it up a little bit. All right. This is material from the other bin. Whole bunch of worms in their new home. And then I will just rejuvenate the other bin. I'm not going to take everything from it. I do my best not to hurt my worms, but my material is so nice and loose and airy that typically I can just grab a handful without applying any pressure, so it's very nice. These are going to be very happy worms. Unbothered by gnats. Okay, this is great. Very happy. Gonna mix that around a little bit. Now, I like the worms to go throughout the entire material, so I'd like to leave leaves on top. Makes them feel safe enough to move around and come all the way up to the top layer, which is typically where I'm adding food. So there's some more food / cover material for them. I know this is not too high. My worms do not try to escape. They are so happy in their homes that I have never had a bolter, a runner. They love their worm bins. I'm pushing it down just a little, not too much. And I'm going to apply my last application of lychate. What we'll do next is we'll put on some ice cubes. That will enable a nice continuous slow release of water over the next few hours. We're also going to cover it with newspaper, which I'll do now. The last part of our master worm bin will be to make sure that we have a continuous slow releasing supply of moisture and that moisture will stay. So, popping out a full ice tray, and I'll probably do this once or twice a week, and I'm going to put my hand in and feel how moist it is or isn't to determine whether or not I should. I really try to avoid it moisture draining into the bottom until I want that to happen. These are some bigger chunks that'll break down a bit more slowly. Then we're going to layer with a little bit of newspaper. If it's not perfect, it's okay. It's for worms. Last thing is I put down some cardboard. Once again, doesn't need to be perfect. Just helps hold in some moisture, and it creates a dry area on the top after it dries out. It's going to dry out because we are going to moisten it. We're also going to come and check it often, maybe every 12 to 24 hours for the next week, just to make sure that it's starting off well and that there isn't any compacting in the corners. All right. The very last step will be some more leaves. Thank you for joining us on this educational adventure. I love to answer questions in the comment section. Feel free to leave comments and questions. This is an ongoing experiment for me, focused on convenience, function, productivity, efficiency, and affordability. I started doing this because purchasing really good soil is very expensive, and I never seemed to get the product that I wanted, so I started making it. You can too. Or you can buy one of our bins, which we custom make, and we can have it shipped to you. I really would love any feedback or input or suggestions of improvement for the next prototype for number 8. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to share them. That would be super helpful in this ongoing project. Give some love to that like button to support our channel and enable us to produce more content. And remember that your green dreams can come true too. This segment is just quickly focused on the lid. It's okay to use glue and tape adhesives on the top. You are not going to put moisture through this. And as you can tell, this is double layered. Not only do I have my strong window mesh below, but I also have a finer, smaller mesh above. This will guarantee that I do not get gnats inside. This lid is very tight.